Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. Hugs as well, all around. And it's a very cosy day where I am. Weather extremely overcast. And the birds are just making the most of the seed outside. And it's a pleasure to watch them. And it's also a pleasure to tape the second part of this story for you tonight. So I really hope you enjoy it. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. I remember, Mr. Farnborough, extremely well my grandfather once telling me that if you started a conversation with old Mr. Dyer back then, he'd quickly cut you off. Probably because he was somewhat antisocial, but he wasn't being rude by any manner of means. My grandfather, you see, he ran a hardware store in town. And old Mr. Dyer became one of his regular, very faithful customers at the store. My grandfather was a naturally very friendly man, and was very, agreeable and congenial towards him. Asked him how he was doing, but his response was always, "I'm fine, thank you very much." You couldn't get anything more out of him, you know. It was tantamount to extracting blood from a stone, if you know what I mean. "I know the type," I said. "I've been in building construction for many years, and I've met all prevaricating kinds of people. There are some that I would describe as evasive and antisocial. So, yes, you get all types of people in this world. Anyway, sorry, don't let me interrupt you. Please go on with the story." Mrs. Donahue nodded her head. "Oh, believe me, Mr. Farnborough, I've only just got started. There is a lot more to tell you about the Dyer family. Anyway, to cut an awfully long story short, the Dyers had two children, Russell and Caitlin Dyer. Russell was the family blue-eyed boy. He was the splitting image of his father, and was as reclusive as both of his parents were. Caitlin, well, she was completely different. She was like the bird that hatched out on an egg that didn't belong to that particular nest, if you know what I mean. That insufferable, objectionable agitator that caused a whole heap of problems for the Dyer family. She was the family rebel, in every sense of the word. That kid that comes along and tries to disrupt the status quo, causing chaos in her wake, like a storm you never forecast. By all accounts, when she was growing up, she was quite an obnoxious kid from what my grandfather used to tell me. I know this because she and her brother attended the local school together. Growing up, Caitlin was always getting into trouble. She'd end up in fights, pulling people's hair, bringing kids to tears. She was notorious for being really quite the bully. I understand when Caitlin was at home in this cabin with her family, she got into all kinds of squabbles and arguments with her family. She'd spend a great deal of time in town, refusing to come home at all. She didn't like hanging around with her family, you know. She made no secret of the fact that she despised them. She described them as eccentric misfits, as they refused to socialize, and of course wouldn't spend any of their vast fortune on her. I guess she fancied herself as being the rich kid in town, wearing trendy, very fashionable clothes, and driving around in an elite sports car or something like that. She'd have adored being the center of attention, you know, and would have loved people to envy and admire her. Mrs. Dyer made all her clothes, and Caitlin absolutely hated wearing them. She felt those clothes made her look frumpy, and that she looked as if she was playing a rather obscure part in Little House on the Prairie. It would seem the practical clothes her mother made her were far too conservative for her. She wanted something that was out there, if you know what I mean. I know, from what my grandfather told me, that Caitlin resented growing up in the cabin, because she knew her parents were wealthy. And she realized that she could, with their kind of money, be living in a luxurious home. She described her father as a scrimping penny pincher, as he told her he had absolutely no desire to live in a big house, and was very happy with the cabin where he'd grown up as a boy. By all accounts, old Mr. Dyer didn't want to change the arithmetic patterns of a lifetime. Well, Caitlin constantly bickered and complained about all this, threatening to leave home at any opportunity. I gather Caitlin called her parents every profane name under the sun, causing a great deal of stress in that family, who desperately wanted to enjoy a peaceful life. But Caitlin insisted on ruining that peace by causing a great deal of disruption. The Dyers hated any kind of conflict. Caitlin Dyer did finally leave home at about 17 years old with a boyfriend of hers who my grandfather told me was a nasty piece of work. She later married him. The family didn't hear a dicky bird from her for many years. I know her father gave her a hefty cheque, just so that he could get his nagging daughter out of his hair once and for all. I understand the cheque was quite substantial, and would have made a young teenager's life very plush. I guess paying off Caitlin meant that he wasn't subjected to a barrage of her constant whinging and complaining all the time. So I guess for him it was rather like paying off the exterminator to get rid of a cockroach, in a manner of speaking, as Caitlin had become that, a complete pest. Mr. Dyer later cut his daughter off from the will, leaving this land and his vast fortune to his son Russell. I guess he felt unduly snubbed by his daughter, who had never contacted them again, and not even so much as sent them a postcard over the years. Russell lived in the cabin with his parents until they died. I'm sure they must have been extremely hurt that Caitlin had completely abandoned them. Caitlin showed them no regard, you see. She ruthlessly cut all ties with her family, viewing them all with so much contempt. As far as she was concerned, they had deprived her of living the life of luxury she believed she deserved. After Russell's parents passed away, he received all the inheritance, and I do understand the only time Caitlin made her appearance known was at their father's funeral, where I'm told she collapsed into heaps of tears over his coffin. Some believed she was genuinely displaying sorrow. Others believed it was all a big act. When Caitlin realised her father had cut her off from the will, she was incensed, describing it as grossly unfair and a despicable thing for her father to do to her. She tried to persuade her brother Russell to give her half of the family inheritance, but he point-blank refused to do so. I understand Russell's father had warned him that Caitlin would come crawling back after their deaths, trying to get her grubby hands on the inheritance. Old Mr. Dyer had notified the attorneys of his estate, and told them under no circumstances was Caitlin, his daughter, to get a dime of the money that he'd left his son. There were a lot of outrageous disputes, of course, and Caitlin tried desperately to take Russell to court, claiming she had a right to a share in the family inheritance. But alas, there was not anything she could do about an ironclad will, so to speak. Russell Dyer lived on this land until he was about 53 years old, until his life was tragically cut prematurely short. He never married, nor did he sire any children. He lived a life of a recluse like his parents had done, although his sister Caitlin was often seen in Jasper by many of the locals who recognised her, even though she'd been living in Toronto for a very long time, since she was 17 years old. Many people believed she kept visiting Russell to beg him to give her what she believed was her rightful share of the family inheritance. But I don't think that Russell Dyer buckled under her demands. Anyway, this is where the story gets extremely interesting, Mr. Farnborough. But it's very important for you to know about it, as you are wanting to purchase this property. But something very bad happened here. That's what I needed to warn you about. It did? I asked, looking perturbed. What happened here, Mrs. Donahue? I take it this has got something to do with the previous owner, Russell Dyer. You say he passed away at 53 years old. Did he die in the cabin by any chance? Was that where he met his end? You've got it in a nutshell, Mr. Farnborough. Well, almost. He didn't pass away in the cabin. Not like that. Not in that way. The whole story is much more nefarious, and the police believe Caitlin Dyer was involved in her brother's tragic passing. But the trouble is, without any evidence, you can't prove a single thing. One day the police got a very mysterious phone call. The voice had been deliberately changed on the end of the phone with one of those voice changers, so the person calling sounded as if their voice was somewhat robotic or AI generated. The call was made from one of those burner phones, so it couldn't be traced. The person on the phone said that Russell Dyer had taken his own life and was hanging from a tree. in the wood grove on his property. The anonymous call claimed that he had been very depressed and wanted to end it all. It was ironic that someone claimed to be aware of Russell's emotional life, for he had lived the life of a recluse, and no one knew very much about the man. So the anonymous caller seemed to know a whole lot about him, which led the police to smell a very big rat. The police arrived on the scene shortly after that phone call, and tragically they did find Russell hanging from a tree on the wood grove in this property. Just like the anonymous caller had described he would be found. I can take you to see the tree if you like, Mr. Farnborough. It looks all very benign. It's hard to imagine that anything dreadful happened there. I would appreciate seeing the tree. That would be very kind of you, Mrs. Donahue. I take it you're going to tell me the death of Russell Dyer was deemed suspicious. A possible homicide. Is that where you're going with this? That's exactly where I'm going, Mr. Farnborough. Ostensibly, on first inspection, it really did look like a plain case of suicide. As if Mr. Russell Dyer had hung himself. The coroner, on examining the body during an autopsy, claimed it was an iniquitous homicide, as there were defensive wounds all over Mr. Dyer's body. He was covered in bruises and scratches, as if he'd been fighting off someone. The coroner believes he put up quite the fight, and someone had forcibly hanged him on a tree and tried to make it look like a suicide. So instead of being described as a suicide, the coroner described the death as being exceedingly suspicious. Let's just say, Mr. Farnborough, the only one to stand to benefit from Russell Dyer's death was, of course, his sister Caitlin. The question you have to ask yourself is, why would someone phone the police to report Russell Dyer's death? He was a reclusive. He could have been gone for years without anybody even noticing that he was long since deceased. Someone wanted his body recovered as quickly as possible from that wood grove, so that invariably the estate would be wound up. And the only person who'd want that is someone who stands to benefit from Russell Dyer's estate. Against all the odds, Russell Dyer left his entire estate to his sister Caitlin 6 months before his death, when he made significant changes to his will, I believe. He was planning to leave his money to the rhino conservation in South Africa, but that all changed 6 months before he passed away. You have to ask yourself, why would he do a thing like that? There was no love lost between Caitlin and her brother. So why does he suddenly change his will like that? And then 6 months later, he's suddenly found dead. It sounds very suspicious to me. I could not help but agree. Of course it's suspicious, Mr. Farnborough, said Mrs. Donahue insistently. I was saying, Caitlin, was regularly seen in Jasper. Some believed she was visiting her brother Russell, and that maybe they had reconciled, but I don't believe that for a second. I think that poisonously toxic woman was bullying her brother about the inheritance, probably for years, until he finally folded and agreed to make her beneficiary of his will, should he die. And then lo and behold it happens. It's all suitably, terribly convenient, don't you think? I agree. It sounds very fishy to me. Where was Caitlin Dyer, may I ask, when her brother Russell was found hanging on that tree in the wood grove? Was she in the Jasper area by any chance? That's the trouble. Caitlin was in Toronto with her 3 kids and her husband, so she wasn't even in Alberta at the time when this happened. The police couldn't pin a thing on her, and when they searched the cabin for any fingerprints, all the surfaces had been wiped thoroughly clean. When Caitlin was questioned by the police about all this, she simply claimed she'd reconciled with her brother, which is why he changed his will to benefit her. But the whole case stinks to high heaven, if you ask me, of something villainously nefarious. Anyway, Mr. Farnborough, just so you know, Mr. Russell Dyer hung himself on a tree on this 18-acre plot of land. Or at least it was made to look like that. A very, very sad story, let me tell you. Just so you know, a lot of people in town think that Russell Dyer was a sad man, just because he had no friends. They wished in some way they'd reached out to him more often, so he didn't feel so terribly alone. But I'm of the opinion that Russell Dyer was probably much like his parents had always been, a recluse that enjoyed keeping himself to himself, He liked it that way. My grandfather always said that old Mr. Dyer was never cut out to be social. He wasn't wired that way, you know. So maybe like father, like son, if you know what I mean. I rather suspect Russell Dyer was a chip of the old block, which is why he never married. Lived a very solitary, sequestered life here. But one way or another, that sister got to him in the end. I would appreciate, Mr. Farnborough, if you didn't repeat exactly what I've told you to anyone else. You see, if you put an offer in for this property, you'll be buying it directly from Caitlin Dyer's attorneys, and she's looking for a quick sale. So if you offer her the asking price, the place will be yours, of that I am in no doubt. I know she's very eager to sell the property. She can't wait to get her greedy hands on all the money from the sale. What a shocking story, I said. You're right. It sounds very much like foul play. And the fact that the man leaves everything to his sister in the will, 6 months before his imminent demise, leaves me with very grave reservations, I have to say. My thoughts exactly, Mr. Farnborough. You're a man after my own heart. From what I've heard, Caitlin Dyer was not a nice woman. It doesn't bother you, does it, Mr. Farnborough, that Mr. Russell Dyer was found hanging on this land? I think some potential buyers might be suspicious, well, superstitious is the better word to use, over things like that, and see purchasing this property as a bad omen of sorts. You aren't superstitious, Mr. Farnborough, are you, by any chance? Not at all. Superstitious I am definitely not. Nor am I worried that someone was hung on this land. Of course, it's a very unpleasant story. But let's just face it, if we go back in history, many a soul has probably died on this land, in nefarious ways. Think about it. Jasper County, Georgia, sent troops to the Confederate Army in the Civil War, and portions of General Sherman's army marched through Jasper County during its march to the sea. So a lot of property was vandalized and destroyed around here, and I'm sure there were multiple deaths in the process. So me worrying about someone dying on this land would be rather counterproductive, don't you think? Are you going to show me around? But of course, said Mrs. Donahue. I would be delighted. 10 minutes later, I had put in an offer for the place, and 30 minutes later the offer had been accepted by Caitlin Dyer herself. So I was able to return home to Toronto to tell my wife Frida the great news. You found an 18-acre plot of land near Jasper, have you? She asked. With mountains and a lake? Are you kidding me, Kurt? Your offer has been accepted. That's right, love. The offer has been accepted. Can you believe it? I feel as if I need to pinch myself to believe this is true. Think about it, Frida. We can build our dream home on this gorgeous piece of land. 18 acres it is. Isn't that brilliant news? We've waited for this moment, Frida, all our lives. And now here it is, like a gift from the gods. It feels so incredibly surreal. But why didn't you tell me about this, Kurt? You told me you were going off on a business trip. But I never imagined you were going to look at a property that we might potentially buy. Why all this secrecy? I don't understand. Why did you shut me out of this? I'd have loved to have seen this place myself. Well, it was a business in a manner of speaking, I said. In truth, I didn't want to disappoint you, love, if everything went dreadfully pear-shaped. So that's why I discluded you. I'm not a child, love. I'm big and ugly enough to handle any kind of disappointment. Goodness gracious, I've had enough in my life. Anyway, that's water under the bridge now. Tell me all about this property. Well, where to start? There is so much to say. 18 acres, love. 18 acres. I knew that this was the place for us the moment I laid eyes on it. But I also knew that if I sneezed, the place would slip through my fingers. It's got everything you wanted, love. Imagine that. A huge lake, a wood grove, lots of spectacular mountain views. I promise you, this place is so exquisite. And the dogs are going to love it there. Just imagine how they're going to appreciate all that space. Well, I don't know what to say, Kurt. One part of me wants to kill you for not taking me with you, and another part of me wants to hug you. But I'm so delighted we found a place to build our retirement home. Oh, goodness gracious, the dogs are going to love all that space. They're going to think that heaven has landed. I then proceeded to tell my wife about Russell Dyer, and how his body had been found hanging on a tree in the wood grove on the property, and although nothing had been proved, the police intrinsically believed that his sister Caitlin Dyer was somehow responsible for his demise. "But of course she is, sweetheart," said my mother adamantly. "There's no doubt about that in my mind." My wife had always fancied herself as a bit of a sleuth, and loved in her spare time to read crime novels. "She's the only person to stand to gain from his death. Follow the dots, and of course the money, and you'll get to the culprit. Nobody kills someone for the hell of it, especially if they're a recluse. I mean, 6 months before this poor man's tragic passing, he leaves his estate to his sister Caitlin, who has a less than agreeable reputation, and bingo, he's now dead." "But you aren't concerned about that, are you?" I asked my wife. "The fact that Russell Dyer was found hanging on the property we purchased? I'm sure over the centuries there have been multiple deaths on this land, but this is a much more recent death, and it does appear to be a homicide." "But of course I'm fine about it," said my wife reflectively. "It's desperately sad, of course it is, but people die everywhere, don't they? And everybody dies at some point in their life. Imagine if people refused to buy places where other people had died. There probably would be nowhere for anyone to live." "Good point, love. I hadn't thought of it like that." It was a year later when me and my wife Frida finally moved into our gorgeous home, that I had painstakingly built and designed from scratch, with the help of my colleagues in the trade, that had helped to create for me and my wife our dream home. By all accounts, our exquisite wooden home outlived our wildest expectations, and it was an absolute privilege waking up every morning to idyllic views every day over the lake that stretched out before us like a rich tapestry of oils. I knew instinctively that with life this good for me and my wife, that we were rarely going to thoroughly enjoy our retirement years together, and what in the world could possibly go wrong when everything was so idyllically perfect? But sometimes, when things are too perfect, something might just give. Our 2 King Charles Spaniels, Humbug and Smarty, who were practically joined at my hip, for they followed me everywhere I went, were beginning to see how much more exciting their lives had become, being away from Toronto, where the opportunities to run wherever you desired and to chase after rabbits at will seemed almost boundless. So I guess for our 2 dogs, they did believe they had died and gone to heaven, for they had entered a doggy paradise. The house I'd created for me and my wife was exquisite in every sense of the word, although I don't wish to blow my own trumpet about that. I had designed it to have the qualities of a Swiss chalet, with extensive glass windows and high balconies, to maximise the prepossessing views over the lake and the smouldering mountains in the distance. No sooner had we moved here than our next-door neighbour, a very effervescent woman in her late 40s, with fiery red hair and mesmerising grey-blue eyes, arrived at our front door, in what appeared to be a bright purple jeep of sorts. In her long, slender hand she was carrying a basket of goodies for me and my wife to enjoy. She was the kind of person you warmed to immediately. She had such a bubbly personality that seemed to match her fiery hair. My wife opened the front door to the woman, and was to say later that Verity had the widest smile she'd ever seen in her life, and she knew at first glance that Verity would become a very close friend with our family, which of course she certainly did. "Hi, my name is Verity," she told us. "I'm so delighted to meet you. I'm your most immediate next-door neighbour. I live on the 18-acre plot of land next to yours. It's the same size as your property. I understand from word around town that you've only just moved into your fabulous house, that you built yourselves. I just wanted to say welcome to your new home. And as I was saying, I'm your next-door neighbour, Verity." "That's right, we moved in a week ago," I told her. "News seems to travel fast around here." "It sure does," said Verity with a twinkle in her eyes. "I'm so delighted to meet you both, and that you've moved in. The 2 of you must join me and my husband Seb for dinner, as soon as you feel more settled in your home. But you're welcome to pop around any time you like, because we're an open house. We enjoy having guests." "We'd love to have dinner with you one night," I said. "Good, then it's settled. How about tomorrow night at 6 then?" "We look forward to it," I said. "Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering, Seb is my husband, and it's actually short for Sebastian," she said, rolling her eyes. "But my husband refuses to be called by his full name. He thinks it's far too effeminate, so no one dares call him Sebastian. Oh, by the way, I brought you some goodies," she said, presenting us with a basket full of cheeses and delicious breads, as well as honeys and some preserves. "This is just a little housewarming present to welcome you to the area. I heard via the grapevine that you're both from Toronto. Is that right?" "Yes, we are from Toronto. This is very good of you," said my wife, taking the basket from Verity and viewing its contents approvingly. "Thank you so much. I have to tell you, I'm a huge cheese lover, and these cheeses look sensational. I can't wait to tuck in." "Good, I'm glad to hear it," said Verity with a giggle. "There's a fabulous cheese shop in town. You really must go and see it. That's where I got those cheeses from. I'm what you might describe as a bit of a cheese connoisseur, or an addict might be a better word to use. Nothing beats good quality cheese, bread, and a glass of wine. It's the best meal in the world as far as I'm concerned." "I wholeheartedly agree with you, Verity," said my wife. "If I was forced to go on a diet, I could never give cheese up. And cheese goes superbly with bread. And I know how they go on and on about carbohydrates, but I won't give up my bread either." "I think we're going to get along famously," said Verity with an approving twinkle in her eyes. She was sober for a brief moment and said, "You do know what happened to the previous owner, Mr. Russell Dyer, do you? The man that used to live here in the old cabin, that I've seen you've since bulldozed. Not that I can blame you for that, of course. The place was falling apart. I think Russell Dyer was actually having a few problems with termites, and once termites set in, you've really got problems on your hands. I'm sure the estate agent would have told you the story concerning Russell Dyer. It's common knowledge around here, but I want to make sure you know about it. I'd hate you to be caught off guard, if you know what I mean." "Yes, I'm afraid to say I do know all about it," said my wife Frida. "Such a sad, sad story. I understand the previous owner of our land was found hanging from a tree in our wood grove over there," said my wife, pointing towards the woods. "My husband showed me that tree, where the poor man met his tragic end. I'm sorry, but he had to have help getting up onto that tree. I gather the defensive wounds on his body revealed he did not commit suicide, and the death has been labelled as suspicious. That's all I really know about the case." "But of course it was suspicious," said Verity adamantly. "I know who did it. It was his sister Caitlin Dyer. That woman was a wasp, let me tell you. She kept visiting Russell over the years, sniffing around him like a bitch on heat. That woman was loathsome. She kept demanding Russell to give her half the inheritance, but he refused her. Caitlin Dyer wasn't backing down, let me tell you. She was like a rampaging bull. Once she got her antlers into you, then she wouldn't stop her attacks. She wore Russell down, let me tell you, constantly nagging, begging him to give her half the family fortune. Every time she came up to Jasper, all the way from her home in Toronto, it was for one quintessential reason, to see Russell again. But the visits were never friendly, nor were they social. There was no love lost between the two of them, let me tell you. Caitlin didn't care a jot about Russell. I know that for a fact. You see, even though Russell Dyer was a recluse, I knew him extremely well. We were very good friends, but not many people knew that. It's not something I've actually told people about." "You were good friends?" I asked, looking somewhat surprised. "That's news to me. From what I understood, Russell Dyer was a bit of a recluse." "Yes, he was a recluse, but I made it my business to become his friend. I was always popping around to the house, bringing him baskets of stuff. We were neighbours after all. When I first visited him, he'd brush me away, almost as if I was an annoying blowfly buzzing around him. But I persisted in getting to know him. I'd drop things around whenever I could at every opportunity. I'm not easily discouraged, you see. I felt it was important to get to know my neighbour. Seb thought I should leave him well alone, but I figured Russell really did need a good friend. And then he opened up to me. My husband thinks I can open anybody up. I guess he's right about that. I just don't give up on people. I refuse to. I knew quite a lot about the dynamics of Russell Dyer's life, so to speak, which is why it's pretty easy for me to figure out what actually happened to my good friend. So you're saying Russell Dyer confided in you? I asked, looking somewhat intrigued. Oh, he shared an awful lot with me. As I was saying, we were very close friends, and he appreciated my friendship, although he absolutely was a recluse, and he liked being that way. I don't believe for a second that Russell was remotely lonely a day in his life. He loved nature, he loved bird watching, he loved, going for long walks and fishing. He really enjoyed his life. Many people don't understand that, because if you have a propensity to be social, someone who is the antithesis of you is hard to understand. But of course you're right about that. If Russell was happy living a lonely life, good for him, I said. But it sounds from what you're insinuating that his sister Caitlin disrupted his peace quite a lot, with all her visits to Jasper, so to speak. Oh, absolutely. She was a nightmare to him, a living nightmare, let me tell you. She visited him 6 months before his tragic demise. She asked him to sign over his estate to her in his will, and if she was dead when he died, she asked him to leave his estate to her children. She told him that way the estate would remain in the Dyer bloodline. Russell Dyer finally agreed to doing this. He knew he'd get his sister off his back, and he'd be happy to do that. He was also pleased that the estate would end up going to his parents' grandchildren, because his parents didn't even know they had grandchildren. So he thought his late father would really appreciate that. Initially he intended to leave his estate to the rhino conservation in South Africa. He was passionate about wildlife, you see, and was eager to help in the protection of endangered species around the world. But his sister managed to get him to change his mind about his will, although I'm glad to say he did leave a sizable donation to rhino conservation. When he told me what was going on with his sister, let me tell you, I smelt a rat straight away. I warned him to tread with care. I suspected Caitlin was up to something really sneaky, and it turns out my gut instincts were absolutely right. Well, it all sounds very nefarious to me, I said. Russell Dyer's sister Caitlin arriving at his cabin, asking him to sign over the estate to her if he died. By the sounds of things, I rather think Caitlin Dyer probably used her children as a useful decoy, because that meant that Russell was thinking about his parents' grandchildren all the time, and not directly of his sister, because at the end of the day, she wanted to get her big fat hands on his money, that's for sure. Well, she succeeded in her endeavours, didn't she? Let's just say Caitlin Dyer is now a very wealthy, affluent woman, said Verity, pulling a face that registered her extreme disgust and revulsion. I'm not sure it'll always be rosy in the garden for Caitlin Dyer, I said. What do you mean by that? Asked Verity, raising a questioning brow. Well, I said, scratching my head rather effectively, in my humble experience, when people get involved in corrupt schemes, it tends to backfire on them in some way. Frida always says karma's a bitch, don't you, love? I said, turning around to look at my wife. Oh, absolutely, said Frida, nodding her head furiously. I believe if Russell Dyer's sister is involved in his demise in some way, it'll absolutely come out. Things always have a way of coming out. Well, I sincerely hope you're right, said Verity. Russell was such a good man, you know, but incredibly reclusive. But he opened up to me, and I'm so grateful for that. I think I might have been the only friend he had in the world. I often popped over to visit him. I dropped off so many goodies for him, like I've done for you now. He was so grateful and appreciative. He soon became a passionate cheese lover like myself, because I introduced him to so many cheeses. I can tell you there was nothing remotely suicidal about him at all. He had a great sense of humour, a kind heart, and a very gentle disposition. The most horrifying thing about this whole case is that 6 months after he signed that will, leaving his sister beneficiary, as you know, then he's found hanging in the woods, And after the coroner's report, it's so obvious to me that she's responsible for his demise. I know she is. I agree with you, said my wife. When it comes to murder, you do have to ask yourself who stands to gain from the death. It's usually a financial gain, in my experience. I imagine at this stage of the investigation, the police haven't got enough evidence to prove that Caitlin was behind her brother's death. Otherwise, they'd have long since flung her into prison and thrown away the key, where no doubt she belongs. And where she'd have to no doubt await trial. It's so frustrating, isn't it? Said Verity, looking really flustered. It's so soul-destroying, don't you think, when someone gets away with murder? I do hope you're right, that Karma's a bitch. I hope that she isn't out of the woods yet, said Verity, tapping her nose. I suppose you're right. The truth does have a funny way of catching up with you. Something's going to give in the case. I pray about it every day, you know. Russell deserves justice. Caitlin Dyer is now sitting on his fortune, and it makes me sick to my stomach, because even if she was in Toronto when he was found hanging on that tree, she got someone to kill him for her. I'm sure of that. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out, does it? You're right, my wife agreed. She must have paid someone to do the dirty deed for her. So there we are. That is the end of part 2. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.